Tom King is everywhere. If you've read Batman in the last decade, you've read Tom King. If you're a fan of James Gunn's DCU, Superman, Supergirl, Lanterns, Tom King has played an instrumental role in all of them. He went from not having a single comic credit to his name to writing the most high-profile DC characters and seamlessly winning Eisner Awards in just 5 years. But there's something very fishy about Tom King, because before he was one of the most celebrated comic book writers in the world, he was a part of the CIA. While most people would distance themselves from such a past, especially considering Tom King was a part of the CIA at the same time of the invasion of Iraq, he leaned into it. He was pushed as the CIA writer, and he stands by and is proud of everything he did in the CIA. But don't ask him what he did because, well, he might have to kill you. Tom King was born in 1978 in Washington, D.C., but he spent most of his childhood growing up in Los Angeles, California. His father was an aspiring but ultimately failed novelist, while his mother worked as a movie studio executive. Remember that detail because we'll come back to it later. Tom King's father was mostly absent throughout his life, so he was primarily raised by his mother and his grandmother. He started reading comics when he was around 7 years old. Both of his parents were smokers, and whenever they'd go out to buy cigarettes, they'd bring him back a comic. That small habit ended up changing his life. Very early on, Tom realized his calling was to be a writer. Specifically, he wanted to write for Marvel and DC, but his mother wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea, having seen firsthand how brutal the entertainment industry could be. Instead, she wanted him to go to law school and be a lawyer. But Tom didn't budge, and eventually they would reach a compromise. If Tom kept his grades up and did well in school, she would support his dream of becoming a writer. And to their credit, they both held up their end of the bargain. After graduating high school, Tom King enrolled at Columbia University. You'd think it was because of their elite academics or the massive opportunities, but no. Tom King went to Columbia for one simple reason: because one of his favorite heroes, Daredevil, went to Columbia. Columbia also happened to be in New York City, right where both Marvel and DC had their headquarters. Tom wanted to be close. He wanted to be in that room. During his sophomore year of college, Tom landed an internship at DC Comics under editor Cliff Chiang. His job was being the copy boy, printing scripts, running errands, but Tom loved it. Just being in the environment, even without writing his favorite characters yet, completely energized him. The motivation only grew the following year when he interned at Marvel Comics, this time as an assistant to legendary X-Men writer Chris Claremont. Suddenly, Tom was surrounded by icons: John Byrne, Peter David, Jimmy Palmiotti, Joe Quesada. He had access to the scripts, story meetings, the inner workings of the industry, and he was learning fast. So fast, in fact, that he managed to sell a Black Knight script directly to Marvel editor-in-chief Bob Harris for $500. This was the beginning of Tom King's legendary comic book career, or at least it would have been, because that same year, 2000, Marvel Comics collapsed into bankruptcy. Bob Harris was fired, Chris Claremont was fired, and just like that, the door slammed shut. Comics really were dying. Shops were closing at rapid rates. No one knew if they'd have a job the next year or the next month. Tom then left comics to go work for the Department of Justice, and maybe starting law school like his mother wanted. His job at the Department of Justice was helping cancer victims get money to pay for their meds. This is also where he met his future wife. At this point, it's 2001, and Tom King had passed the LSAT, which is basically the exam that you need to pass to get into law school, and he was ready to go to the University of Virginia to be a lawyer. But September 11th of 2001 would change everything. We all know what happened that day. Do I even need to explain? 9/11 shocked the world. America was gripped by fear and chaos. And in that moment, Tom King abandoned his law school plans entirely. At just 22 years old, he applied to join the CIA as a counterterrorism operations officer. Now, this is where things get murky because CIA agents aren't supposed to tell you exactly what they did. We know Tom King worked during the war on terror. He worked in Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all over the world. But we do know he spent most of his time in Iraq. Again, remember those details because it will come back later. One thing we do know is that when Tom King was in the CIA, he needed a cover for when he was traveling, essentially a fake identity. His boss wanted him to be undercover as a chemistry businessman, but Tom King rejected this and decided that his cover would be as a comic book writer, since he knew a lot about comics, and he technically almost was. Tom would serve 7 years in the CIA before quitting in 2009 because his son had just been born, and because he was ready to turn this undercover front into a reality. reality. He began writing his superhero science fiction novel, A Once Crowded Sky, and finally got it published in 2012. It received great reviews, but didn't sell very well. And Tom King wanted to write comics. That's why he made the novel in the first place, as a way to break into the comic industry. However, no one really knew him or his work, so he turned to his old mentor from his intern days, Cliff Chiang.
And Cliff, God bless him, was like, I'll give you a list of DC editors. You can email them and just use my name to be like, I know Cliff Chiang. I'm not a crazy person who's emailing you.
Yeah.
And so Cliff gave me all the email addresses for all the DC editors. And I wrote them all individually, about like which books I loved and why, and included, my reviews of my books.
This method is how he landed his first official comic work, an 8-page short story in DC's Time Wrap anthology in 2013. Just 1 year later in 2014, Tom King would work with Tim Seeley to craft the story of Grayson. DC was looking to rework the character of Nightwing into more of a spy espionage story, with Dick Grayson becoming a secret agent. Tom King, already writing a pretty good superhero novel and also being an ex-CIA agent, meant he was perfect for the job, and the series would go on to be a hit. People became very intrigued with this new guy named Tom King, a secret agent series written by an actual ex-spy who was in the CIA. Who wouldn't be fascinated by that? He continued co-writing Grayson while doing random one-off issues of other comics until 2015, when he would write a 12-issue Vision series. This series won the Eisner Award that year for Best Limited Series, and honestly, it deserved it. Vision was nothing short of a masterpiece, developing the character of Vision through a psychological story about trauma and the craving to be human. It would later become a major inspiration for Disney's WandaVision series as well. But if you thought that was big, immediately after this, Tom King would be put in charge of Batman.
A lot of luck, a lot of being in the right place at the right time. I had done well on Grayson, and Vision had become a bigger hit. Vision was like my big breakthrough comic. And so they're like, Tom, you can come on Detective with New 52, which was quite a promotion. I was like, oh my God, I'd only been in comics for a year and a half by then, to then be writing Detective Comics was crazy, right? We don't have a Batman writer, was right about to go in. Who do we have? And so I was on Detective, and so they shifted me over to Batman. And suddenly, instead of being a year and a half till I got Detective, it was a year and a half till I got DC's biggest book. Yeah, I remember when they announced it, I looked at my, at the time I had, whatever, I specifically remember I had 6,000 Twitter followers. And, by the end of Batman, I had 150,000.
Jeez.
So, it's like, wow. I mean, it's a whole different level of everything when you're on Batman.
Being trusted enough to write B-tier characters like Green Lantern or Flash is already a huge deal, and most writers would dream of getting those jobs. But Tom King being offered the keys to Batman, being trusted to relaunch the character into a new era and a new audience after barely 2 years in the comic book industry is simply unheard of. It was an absolutely daunting task, but Tom King delivered, kind of. His run remains probably the most polarizing Batman run ever written. The run dove deep into trauma and psychology, which you'll start to see become a pattern for Tom King's books. Many view it as genius, introspective character development for Batman, while others criticize it for its very weird, almost robotic dialogue and the incessant need to give trauma to every single character, even ones where it might not necessarily fit. The Batman and Catwoman romance was a major plot throughout the series, and probably the most infamous moment of the run was when Selena Kyle left Bruce Wayne at the altar on their wedding day, which was marketed as the book where fans thought the two would finally get married. In Tom King's defense, the book was riddled with editorial interference, especially near the end. Tom King originally intended to write 100 issues, but the run was cut short to 85. Although Batman and Catwoman didn't get married in the original reveal, they were supposed to actually get married in the final finale at issue 100. Bane killing Alfred was also changed. Tom King's original plan was for it to be a fake Alfred, meaning the real Alfred wouldn't die. And when Nightwing was shot by KG Beast and becomes Rick Grayson, losing his memory and becoming a new person, a arc that all Nightwing fans, including me, hate. I hate this arc. Tom King's original plan for this arc was for Nightwing to just be injured but retain his memories, except Tim Drake would be the one taking up the mantle of Nightwing instead, which actually sounds cool. It was pretty much Dan DiDio who was responsible for these egregious changes. Regardless, Tom King's Batman run was still nominated in the Eisners for Best Continuing Series, and Tom King won the 2019 Eisner Award for Best Writer for his work on Batman and Mr. Miracle, another 12-issue maxi series written by Tom King, another series that dives into trauma, belonging, and pain. He was also nominated for Heroes in Crisis, another story about trauma, belonging, and pain. As I said earlier, this is kind of a recurring theme where Tom does many depressing deconstructionist takes on superheroes, and the people who love them absolutely love them, and the people who hate them absolutely hate them. But up until this point in Tom King's career, by around 2020, he didn't really receive that much hate. Sure, he was polarizing. Some people didn't necessarily love his work, but they kept it about his work. But things would begin to noticeably shift by 2023, when James Gunn announced he would be starting a brand new live-action DC extended universe. Along the slate of films announced was Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, a direct adaptation of Tom King's book of the same name. A book that's pretty well received and once again dives into trauma, heroism, and what it all means. James Gunn would also confirm that Tom King would be part of the DCU writers' room, that he had his hands on the Superman movie, and that he would serve as a co-writer on Lanterns. Before this, Tom King's audience only really existed within the comic book scene, since that's all he wrote. But now that he had his hands in these big budget blockbuster films, more people came to know who he was. More people became curious, and that curiosity would lead to them finding out some things that would ultimately make him the most hated comic book writer of all time. This same year, a clip would resurface of Tom King talking about how his experiences in the CIA helped him write Batman. And he said this.
It stinks because you can't write realistic. Like Batman's famous thing, Frank, you did this better than anyone, is to when he's interrogating someone, is to dangle them off a building. Yeah. And then, you know, open his hands up and like, ah! Oh, yeah. And then they just start confessing. That doesn't actually work.
It did the time I tried.
You heard it here. So you don't steal the realism too much.
To most people, this clip would just seem like an innocent joke about interrogation. But to people on Twitter, it was seen as a cold confession. As you can see, Tom King is laughing and playfully recounting an experience of interrogating someone during his time in the CIA. Except he kind of admitted to holding a man off of the edge of a building, threatening to drop him. And many people interpreted this as him enjoying and glorifying torture. Tom King is a racist war criminal who took pleasure in the murder of thousands of Iraqis and employing brutal torture methods. So effing sick of this guy dropping fun facts about the time he got to torture brown people in Iraq and Afghanistan. Something else that's important to note is, as we established earlier, Tom King's past in the CIA is largely the reason he was ever pushed in comics in the first place. He wouldn't have been hired for Grayson if you weren't a part of the CIA. Whenever asked for advice on how to break into comics, Tom King has even jokingly responded, telling people to join the CIA. If Tom King had been silent or passive about his past life, I highly doubt many people would harp on it. But he very intentionally takes every opportunity to bring it up because that was his appeal in the first place. You might wonder why people are specifically bringing up racist allegations, saying that Tom King tortured brown people. That largely comes from this resurfaced clip of Tom King admitting that he helped plan the invasion of Iraq.
I worked on the Iraq War when they were planning it, when they were sort of planning the invasion. And I decided, I've never been good at sleeping, so I was like, I'll work the night shift. And it was really like a skeleton crew. It was like two of us and another guy, and another older person. If the older person didn't show up, and he was not the most reliable person, he was kind of an old drunk, it would be me. It'd be I was 22 at the time, in charge of the fucking Iraq invasion.
The US invasion of Iraq was brutal, and it was sold to the American public as America defending itself, because the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, reportedly had weapons of mass destruction, but this all turned out to be false. Iraq was invaded, destabilized, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were killed, all due to a lie. And with Tom King implicating himself in such a atrocity, combined with the clip of him laughing and being visibly excited, almost reminiscing about the time he tortured someone in the CIA who very well could have been an innocent brown person, it makes sense why so many people would be angry with him. However, the information we have is very limited. Sure, the person Tom King allegedly tortured in the CIA could have been an innocent Iraqi. It also could have been an evil terrorist. It's extremely hard to truly know what Tom King did or how he actually feels about the actions of himself or the CIA, because all of it is classified. Now, it is true that Tom King has openly endorsed and defended the actions of the CIA and has said that he would all do it again, which would theoretically include the invasion of Iraq, which he was a big part of. But this clip of him speaking about the build-up to the invasion of Iraq seems to contradict every prior glamorization of the CIA.
And I remember, so if people don't remember this, but the Iraq War started 2 days early. They invaded 2 days early because they thought they could find where Saddam was. And so I came to work that day, and it was 10 at night, and I go to sit in my chair, and there's George Tenet, who's running the war, and he's sitting literally in my chair. And I was like, oh, hi, Mr. Tenet, or whatever, So I was like, you can have my chair. And he's like, wait, start. They were very proud of this awful thing they were about to do. Wow. So it was very weird to sort of be there at that moment when sort of history was starting, and to have like literally the guy who was starting the invasion sitting in my fucking chair and being like, okay, can I use my computer now?
Notice how Tom King says they were very proud of this awful thing that they were about to do. He refers to the Iraq invasion as awful, and he uses the word they when talking about those who are proud of it, deliberately excluding himself. Now, it's all very vague by design, but does this mean that Tom King does view the Iraq invasion as bad and he's just too afraid to say it outright? What makes this even more interesting is that Tom King has always been seen as a more progressive figure in the comic book industry. He has been outspoken about his dislike for Donald Trump, and he even once levied what many consider a smear campaign against comic book artist Jay Lee because of his affiliation with Comicsgate, a group often associated with racist and misogynistic attacks. However, later the pendulum would switch in the opposite direction when Tom King himself would be deemed a racist and misogynist in his writing. In 2023, it was announced that Tom King would be writing DC's Wonder Woman title. No online fans were absolutely outraged. Tom King's Wonder Woman was labeled misogynistic, not propaganda, despite the plot literally deconstructing toxic masculinity and American imperialism. Many people then began questioning why Tom King was being pushed so hard, both in comics and in the DCU. Why did it seem like he could write any character he wanted? Why was James Gunn using him so much? This led to some even darker conspiracies. Remember earlier when we talked about Tom King's mother being a movie executive? Well, in the 1990s, she was actually an executive at Warner Brothers, the same company Tom King works for now. She also was one of the ones who helped create the DVD, and she actually won an Emmy Award for it. And according to Tom King himself, she even let him and his brother pick the logo that was ultimately used for DVD. Many people believe that Tom King's sudden, very unnatural rise in comics may have something to do with nepotism. How someone can enter the comic book industry, rise to the top in just 2 years, and then immediately be prioritized in a newly built cinematic universe for DC Studios, it can definitely look fishy. But to be clear, these are just speculations and rumors of disgruntled fans with no actual evidence to substantiate them. In June of 2025, it was announced that a Mr. Miracle animated series was coming to DC Studios with Tom King serving as showrunner. And the animated series would be a direct adaptation of his Mr. Miracle comic that won an Eisner. And this is when the fans had enough. Tom King murdered innocent men, women, and children and is proud of it. He doesn't deserve to live, let alone get more gigs. His tweet received 45,000 likes, more than double the likes of the announcement of the series itself. It seemed to be the general consensus that Tom King is an evil, murdering war criminal who should never write superheroes again. Things would only get worse 3 months later, in September, when right-wing political commentator Charlie Kirk was brutally assassinated in front of thousands of people. Red Hood writer Gretchen Felker Martin then decided to laugh at Charlie Kirk's death, saying, "Thoughts and prayers, you Nazi bitch. Hope the bullet's okay," after touching Charlie Kirk. Gretchen Felker Martin was immediately fired, and her Red Hood series was canceled after just 1 issue. Immediately after being fired, Gremlin did an interview complaining about her firing, claiming that she was actually fired because she was trans, and not because she endorsed a literal school pewing. She pointed to the fact that many other notable writers involved in massive controversies were not fired like she was, and she specifically name-dropped Tom King and his involvement in the CIA. This reignited even more anger, people defending her, asking why DC would fire the trans woman for saying evil things and being controversial, but seemingly having zero discipline for Tom King, who they believe actually did do evil things in the CIA. Maybe Tom King is an evil war criminal who enjoyed the suffering of others. Or maybe he's just an older dad who loves superheroes and wants to make great comics and put smiles on people's faces. Or maybe it could be both. Maybe he truly stands by everything he and the CIA did in Iraq. Or maybe he genuinely denounces it but is afraid to publicly condemn the CIA out of fear of retaliation. Or maybe he's afraid to condemn them out of selfishness. Because if he condemned the CIA, it would ruin his image as the badass former CIA agent turned comic book writer. Maybe Tom King's success in comics were purely artificial and the result of nepotism. Or perhaps he's just that good of a comic writer and people want to read his stuff. Regardless of how you feel though, Tom King will continue writing whatever comics he wants and will continue being part of seemingly every DC Studios project, with fans endlessly debating the true nature of his success.